For 75 years, the universe has been trying to teach me to be patient and to accept change. It has not been easy for the universe. I am stubborn. The universe has had to repeat these lessons many times. I am, by nature, a straight line thinker. I make lists, and I love to check things off. I love calendars, clocks, and maps to know where I've been and where I'm going and make sure that I am on time. But I'm also curious, and I love questions and learning new things. Those traits are not always or even often compatible with lists and certainties. The universe teaches in many ways, sometimes through pain and tears. My husband and I struggled through years of infertility before medical technology and bodily rhythms aligned, and we produced a beautiful daughter. It was hard, but we had to wait for the right time. Later, that beloved daughter became seriously ill, and we had to accept that it was her choices in her own time that would lead her back to health. Lists were no help there, but love and trust and adaptability were quite valuable. Now, in retirement, I'm trying something new. After a career in academia where writing was structured, where I could write from a lovely logical outline, I'm writing historical fiction. And I discovered that outlines don't work in this fictional world. I need to know the characters and listen to their stories and discover where their stories take the plot. I've learned to be patient with the days I can't find time to write, or even the weeks and months when other things take over my life. In those supposedly unproductive times, fresh ideas come to me. I learn more about the people in Hillsborough, and their stories take new turns. It's quite exciting. And the universe must be breathing a big sigh of relief. Finally, some progress. Our church is also trying something new. Actually, we're trying a lot of new things, and all at once, or that's how it feels sometimes. There are days when I just want us to have clear goals, a schedule, and a building, and get on with being a normal UU church, whatever that means. Then the universe taps me on the shoulder and reminds me that there is enormous value in the process of wading through the goo of change. We learn so much about ourselves, what we value, and what goals we want to reach. We try new things. And some work and some don't, but each failure or success contains a lesson. We keep moving. Lists may not help much, at least not with the big things. But love and trust and adaptability should be quite valuable.
Lynn started today's service with a reading that began with, "Welcome to this place where certainty transforms into questions. Welcome to this place where what was fixed begins to shift, where rigidity embraces unfolding as we join in the dance of transformation." When you heard the word certainty transforms to questions, or what is fixed begins to shift and rigidity embraces unfolding, what did you think? Is the dance of transformation a dance you want to do? Some days, maybe. Other days, maybe you're seeking certainty, something fixed, things that can remain the same versus unfold. When those words refer to our individually examined faith, they could be seen as a positive. In Unitarian Universalism, they are seen as a positive. As I discussed last week, one of our first tenets of our faith is that revelation isn't sealed. We are constantly growing and learning and examining what we think and what we believe and what we do as spiritual practices, etc. But when evolution is in connection to the life of the congregation, the organization, a church that you have grown to love and depend on, evolution, change, transformation may be more challenging. Transformation. Sometimes it happens slowly in the background of our lives as individuals and organizations. Sometimes we are kind of caught by surprise. We turn around one day and we say, wow, look at me. Look where I've come. But most times, transformation takes energy. It is messy. It can be challenging and hard, gooey. The sort of story the story of Homer transforming didn't actually speak of the goo that was inside that chrysalis, but it spoke of the surprise of transformation. Lynn and I decided to talk about the goo stage of metamorphosis because it's such a compelling metaphor. During the stage of profound changes inside the chrysalis is some amazing transformative space where some things go away, some things remain, and some new things emerge. There's this common misperception that when the caterpillar goes into that chrysalis, everything is destroyed. The metaphor has been one of death and resurrection, but in truth, that isn't actually scientifically correct. A radio show podcast titled Goo and You has a reporter or a writer going into a butterfly rainforest. Some of you maybe have gone into the butterfly hut at the state fair. There's something so frigging magical about that. If you haven't done it, I highly recommend it. It might sound cheesy, but it's awesome. So she goes into this rainforest, and there her guide cuts into a chrysalis to show her what's inside. The reporter says, ugh, oh my gosh, into the microphone as she observes the pale, white, yellow, goopy goo, as she calls it. It looks like a goopy soup or cells that are magically become a butterfly or a moth. It's a very natural phase of pubation, which is when the chrysalis situation happens. It's such a dramatic transformation that it feels miraculous to me. But here are few things I learned from that show. First of all, if you cut open a caterpillar, you will see inside of it structures of the future butterfly or moth, way before it enters into the phase of pubation. These structures, including unopened wings, are actually tucked inside the chrysalis, safely separated from the goo. These wings survive from the time before, through the goo phase, and into the new. Also, here's another interesting fact. I found this very fascinating. A biologist explained an experiment on caterpillars. I apologize in advance for the description includes using shock, so please take care of yourself if that might cause you some trauma. The scientists subjected the caterpillars to an obnoxious smell. It was noticeable to the caterpillars, but it wasn't a deterrent. They just kind of went about their business even when the smell was present. However, then the experimenter changed it up, and when the caterpillars were exposed to the smell, they delivered a shock. And this went on for a while. Smell, shock, smell, shock, smell, shock. In time, that group of caterpillars exposed to this regimen moved into the pubation phase and went through the cycle and emerged as moths. Those moths, however, when exposed to the smell, hightailed it out of there. They went in a different direction. This shows that they actually had memory that made it through the goo phase and out into the next. Fragments of the brain and other parts of the caterpillar and the moth are contained in that goo. So this makes the metaphor of the goo all the more interesting in my mind. It's not one of death and new life. It's a story of that messy middle made up of some of the past, the present, and some of the future all together. If we apply it to organizations and to individuals, we find that when we go through change, we may end up as something quite different than what we were in the beginning, but there's always some of that old or the prior you in there. And when churches like MSUS go through changes, there will always be part of the past and the present that is part of the future. It's true that at times we go through a change and appear quite different. I'd say that there are aspects of our current life here as a congregation that feels very different. We have an exploratory team up working on a potential partnership with the UCC Church in New Brighton. We're just talking to their exploratory team. We're going to actually meet with them the first time today at noon. But what the team was talking about was how different it feels to be here, compared to our old sanctuary in that quaint little New England church. There was a way that we were held in that space, and I think the exploratory team was kind of reflecting on being in the sanctuary over at New Brighton UCC and how that feeling returned to them. Brian was talking about his daughter, who was saying, it's just a room with chairs now, and I mean, and in a way that's true, right? We create a holy space. But I would say if somebody came and they had been with us in the past and they arrived for the first time, it may feel unfamiliar. It may feel that it didn't have any of the past. But the truth is, there's a lot that's recognizable. There's the times that we have our chalice lit, we have our hymnals, we sing the same hymns, we do joys and sorrows, we sing Go Now in Peace. And then there's the things that are consistent, such as the authenticity and the joy of this congregation that have been present throughout time. In her reflection, Lynn talked about the universe teaching her how to be patient and accept change. How these lessons we encounter can sometimes and are often painful or hard. Lynn lifted up love and trust and adaptivity as the 3 words that help during these times of change as we wade through the goo of change. Love, trust, and adaptability. They're present at this time, and also is sometimes a great sense of freedom and creativity if we can pay attention to it, if we can allow it to be along with the mix of all the other emotions and feelings and experiences. The last thing I want to talk about with that chrysalis, and it's true with other things, Lynn reminded me it's true with a little chick coming out of a egg, is that you can't actually help that butterfly get it. Like if you cut the chrysalis, the butterfly will not survive. There is something about that period of struggle that is necessary. It strengthens them, it creates them as what they are. So I find that also as an interesting piece of change, is that sometimes the easy way out may not actually help it, help one survive in a way. So I plan to spend part of this morning in conversation. It's our second Sunday. I'm not going to yak at you the whole time. But first I want to add one other little layer from a book called Comfortable with Uncertainty by Pema Chodron, a Buddhist. It was recommended by Kathy Ehlers after she heard my weekly video on the topic for worship this week. When I listen to Buddhist teachers, I'm always struck by their acceptance of change compared to my sometimes resistance. So here are some of the phrases and ideas that struck me from the book. We are part of a dynamic system in which everything and everyone is in process. I don't know why I want to resist that. I would like things just to be, not constantly in process. But they also say that there is a fundamental ambiguity in being human. So those of us who like to figure it out, have our little charts checked off, the ambiguity that is part of life is something that we need to embrace. They talk about life always being in constant flux. Buddhism is about accepting versus resisting, because to resist this state of constant change and uncertainty, they say, is a source of suffering. You can kind of go along with it, or you can resist and suffer. It makes me think of the Serenity Prayer, which includes so much wisdom. We need to accept the things we cannot change. That's that life is constantly in process and in flux. And then we have to have the courage to change the things we can, such as ourselves or parts of organizations which we belong to. Of course, the Serenity Prayer ends with, do people know what it is? The wisdom to know the difference. Yes, this is something we do acquire throughout the years. Lynn talks about being 75 and the light bulbs, getting a little brighter in terms of how to navigate change through life. Bridget Stallkamp, a consultant with the company Accenture, wrote several articles about change using that metaphor of the caterpillar and pubation and emerging as a moth or a butterfly. She says, when I reflect on organizational transformations, the analogy holds. Every transformation has a goo phase, and it's usually the longest part of the life cycle, just like in nature. In this goo phase, we're not what we were, but we aren't what we will be, our future state. We're not there either. And as in nature, if you were to peek inside during that stage without knowing what you were looking at, it wouldn't look like much progress. Life in churches, it's slow in changing. We've returned to questions of a building, the name of our congregation, filling leadership slots for years. But even if you don't see progress, there is progress. At this point, we have an active team looking for a new minister. We're exploring partnership with New Brighton UCC. And as I mentioned, we're holding our first exploratory meeting with them today. And we're gonna vote on whether we want to change our name or not in the month of May. Stallkamp says, we aren't spending enough time talking about the goo phase. Why? Perhaps because it's ambiguous. It's hard to describe, and it's even more difficult to measure. As a result, few people realize how valuable this stage is. When I was a leadership in the queer community, I learned about the terms losing forward. I think Lynn kind of alluded to that in her sharing today. It means that whether you win or lose an election, or whether you get a policy passed or not, it's the process, even of getting to a loss, that is the time when you engage people, when you gain new knowledge, when you move that dial just a little bit forward. It's called losing forward. So face it, we are part of a dynamic system in which everything and everyone is in process, all the time. Thank goodness. New knowledge, experiences, and discoveries are important, and sometimes it's just a lot to move through, though, especially with so many moving pieces happening at once, as Lynn said. We're in process ourselves, we're in process in relationship with others and the organizations we love, and we're in process in the world at large. So we have some time, and I'd love to talk a little bit, hear from you guys about change and transformation, kind of reflecting on this messiness of the goo stage and how we live in relation to the goo. Lynn shared some of the transitions in her life, so I'd love to open it up with these questions and really let your heart go where your heart goes. There's no, this is not a right answer situation going on here. So I'm going to have Bruce play music for a little bit, and this is what I'd like you to reflect on. What change, as you're listening to this morning, is coming up in your heart? And how are you feeling about it as it comes up? What emotions arise? How are you feeling about it? And do you have things when you reflect on change, on this goo stage, that you do in your own life to help you sustain yourself in this phase?
Say that one again.
Yep. So what's coming up in your heart? How are you feeling about it? What emotions are coming up? And do you have things in your life that you do, whether it's a spiritual practice or something else, that helps you live through the goo? What keeps you glued as you're in the goo? Maybe that's the question. So Bruce, I'm going to let you play for a minute, and then we will hand around the mic and see what folks have to say. So just listen to your heart for a minute. Maya Angelou says, we delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve the beauty. So we're given these precious days and moments to live together, and there's so much we do not get to choose. Our lives are constantly in flux in subtle and large ways, and we live with that fundamental ambiguity of being human. It's a wild ride. Sometimes it's exhausting, other times it's invigorating, sometimes it's stress-inducing, and other times it's joyful and exciting. I was reflecting this past week with our Soul Matters small group that I am constantly struck by how willing people in this congregation are to be vulnerable and authentic with each other. We are storied people with histories that include times of transformation and times that we are swimming deep in that goo, and we don't know what, if anything, will emerge. So a word of advice, why not? Lean in. Go to things online or in person, read what's going on here, come to forums, engage in conversations. You will find thoughtfulness and caring and kindness and joy, the listening that Janice was talking about, the reflection that I've heard all of you talking about today. These are elements that are going to sustain our lives. Meaning making, living by the values we identify as we strengthen this congregation, working with mindful interdependence, authentic curiosity, and courageous love. It will sustain us, and it will make this endeavor of living our precious lives that much richer. We are indeed better together, and what we make of our own lives and our congregation matters. So go gently, curiously, compassionately, and even joyfully. Have music accompany you as we move through the goo of life and emerge knowing that our past and present and future all come with us. May it be so, and amen.